Thank you and welcome. And today's event is, of course, hosted by the German American Institute Saxony and, of course, the American Space Leipzig. We're sending out special thanks to the U.S. Embassy and the Consulate in Leipzig, as well as the Fulbright Commission for supporting us and supporting this event as well. As a part of remembering the late Professor Crister Garrett, we have reopened the call for applications to a scholarship that has been set up in his name. I would like to invite his daughter, Kaisa Garrett, to speak about the importance of this initiative. So welcome, Kaisa.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kaisa Garrett. I am Crister Garrett's eldest daughter. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Sadly, my mother, who was supposed to speak tonight, fell very ill and is still so much under the weather that she couldn't be here with us this evening. However, she did supply me with the words she provided for tonight, so please bear with me if I glance down at my cheat sheet every now and again. Crister, my father, would have loved to see you all here tonight and would have provided us with some analysis and explanation of recent political events, which I am sure we would have all loved. He had a way of explaining the most complicated affairs in a clear and intelligible language, so even if you had no knowledge on the subject, you could follow. Me, his daughter, I have experienced many let's say discussions on political subjects. However, my 16-year-old self never let these drone on for too long. He believed that with knowledge comes understanding, with understanding comes respect, and with respect comes peaceful coexistence. His goal was to teach young people of all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds how to obtain knowledge and use that knowledge for the greater good in our society. One of the last things he worked on before he passed, I remember this myself very vividly, was writing a recommendation for one of his students who wanted to go study abroad. His efforts to enable as many students as possible to travel, to be curious, to engage in and absorb different cultures was one of the reasons we created the scholarship. He was so passionate about cultural immersion as a simple way to break down stereotypes and build understanding and acceptance of different worldviews. A natural result of such efforts is the development of a type of respect and cooperation that is crucial for addressing global challenges and creating a more peaceful and interconnected world. I'm happy that we were able to award the first scholarships and that we received such positive feedback. The next call for applications is out, and we are excited to see what will come in. However, in order to keep this process going, we need not only applications, but also donors whose generous contributions help replenish the pool of funds from which we draw. Please refer to the website of the DAIS, where you will find all the information on how to donate, which brings me to the many people that help making this scholarship work. I am grateful that the DAIS has become the home for our scholarship. Almost all the people working there knew my father firsthand as students, and they are pouring a lot of heart and dedication into it. A big thank you to Eric Frauenholz, Erika Larson, and Heather Prüssing, for helping us with reading the applications and carrying out the whole process. And last but not least, a heartfelt thank you to Stephen Sokol, who came in from Washington, D.C. to hold this first memorial lecture tonight. It is an honor to have you here. So please enjoy the lecture and give whatever sum you can to ensure that we can support as many young people as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kaisa. I would also like to now introduce the Consul General, John Crosby. Yeah, thanks, John.
Good evening, everybody. Dear Kaisa, dear Steve, dear Erika, dear Eric, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, what an honor to be able to welcome you all here tonight to the first annual Crister Garrett Memorial Lecture. I never had the chance to meet Crister Garrett. I wish I had. I have heard since the day I arrived in in Leipzig wonderful things about him. I've heard what a truly remarkable person he was, a beloved professor and colleague, a beloved husband and father, an excellent academic, a staunch transatlanticist, just a wonderful human being. And it's really a huge honor to be here tonight with all of you. His passing was a huge loss. I wasn't here. I can feel that. I feel that at events like this. I've felt this over and over and over again since I've been here. I've heard from colleagues that when they think about who could participate in a panel discussion or moderate a transatlantic event, it's often Crister Garrett's name that is the first name that is still mentioned. But Crister has not just left a lasting impression on our team and the work at the consulate, he had an incredible impact on the transatlantic relationship with Mitteldeutschland. It was through his innovative thinking, tireless advocacy that we saw the establishment of the first American space in Eastern Germany here at the university 10 years ago. The American Space Leipzig became part of a network of more than 600 American spaces worldwide that the State Department funds to foster learning about the US, discussion, civic engagement, and to encourage the following of democratic principles. I actually spent a year building up in better times for that country the network of American spaces in Afghanistan more than a decade ago, and wish that we were still able to talk about that in the way that we talk about the American spaces in Germany today. In Western Germany, several of such institutions, back then called America Houses, Amerikahäuser, were founded right after World War II. They were established as windows to America, as centers for exchanging perspectives to foster cooperation and constructive dialogue between the United States and Germany. Now called German American Institutes, these centers are living symbols of our strong transatlantic relationship. They evidence a shared commitment to democracy, freedom, and prosperity for all. No such institution had been established in Eastern Germany until Crister made the push for it. I understand he was the one who laid the foundation for the establishment not only of the American space here, but of the Deutsch-Amerikanische Institut Sachsen as well. The consulate supported the idea of an American space in Leipzig from the very beginning, knowing that it's exactly here in Mitteldeutschland where institutions and voices advocating for a strong transatlantic relationship are needed most. We hear it in conversations, we see it in opinion polling, we see it in social media commentaries and letters to the editor in regional newspapers. The more than 4 decades of pause in the transatlantic relationship during the GDR era have led to a much higher skepticism towards the United States that still persists, unfortunately, today. And while we'd like to think time will work its wonders and that generational change will take us in the right direction as a natural part of a healing process, Steve and I were just talking a little bit earlier today about how we can't take that for granted. Russian promulgated disinformation efforts are persistent. Sometimes deep-seated prejudices can be passed from one generation to the next. We have to be vigilant. We have to be vigilant to keep doing the hard work day in and day out to make sure we understand each other better and to make sure that our deeply intertwined societies become even more so. That said, we've come a long way since the fall of the wall. I was here in Mitteldeutschland in 1993 and 1994. I spent some time in the Altmark in northern Saxony-Anhalt. And I'm so delighted to be back here now and to be able to witness how profoundly things have changed for the better in the intervening years. The linkages between the United States and Mitteldeutschland are strong, they're enduring. The US is the second largest or largest foreign investor in all 3 states of central Germany. There are uncountable exchanges on many levels, from high school students to professionals. I'm so thrilled to hear about yet another one this evening that's going to make that community grow and flourish even more. There are incredible scientific cooperations. I love going to Thüringen and where I'm able to say in Thuringia that NASA couldn't send rocket ships into outer space without the contributions of the scientific and commercial communities in Jena and maybe even more broadly in Thüringen. Couple of months ago, I guess it was, I was out in the suburbs of Leipzig at a company called MTEX, which is a German company that's building the antenna for the United States National Radio Astronomy Observatory, the largest antennas ever built in the world. This German company is going to New Mexico to be able to build them on site near our National Radio Astronomy Observatory. That is evidence of two societies that trust each other implicitly to have that level of scientific exchange and cooperation. We've got more than 20 sister city partnerships with Leipzig Houston as a prime example, or Houston Leipzig. I don't know. I guess there are both of those organizations. It's so exciting for me to travel around all three states of Mitteldeutschland and hear more and more about how these partnerships are flourishing. So I could go on, but we will hear more about the transatlantic dialogue in Eastern Germany in just a minute from Dr. Stephen Sokol, whose lecture, if it hasn't changed since my remarks were written, is entitled 30 Years of Transatlantic Dialogue in Eastern Germany. Did I get it right? All right. Good. Steve, thanks so much for being here today. Was delighted to see that you would be the speaker today. I didn't know Crister Garrett personally, as I mentioned before, but from everything I've heard, I know the bar was sky high to find someone who could honor his memory appropriately with this lecture. You could not have chosen a better person for that than Steve Sokol. So thank you. Really appreciate you being here. Tremendous thanks as well to the University of Leipzig, the American Space, the German-American Institute of Saxony. The university and the university library specifically provide a wonderful venue for the American Space. We in the consulate are very, very grateful for the continued support. And thank you, Eric, as well, for not only your valuable work as the executive director of the American Space and DACE, but also for taking on the task of stepping in to make sure that Crister Garrett's vision could become a reality. That's a huge job from what I understand, and you're doing a great job of it. So thank you. So I wish the American Space another 10 exciting years and more. I hope that there are more discussions, more events to advance our common goal of further strengthening the transatlantic relationship in Mitteldeutschland. And I'm really, really happy to be able to hear what Steve has to say, to honor the memory of Crister Garrett, and to make sure that we are on a continual path to strengthening the transatlantic relationship. Thanks very much, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. I'm grateful I can see so many familiar and new faces here tonight. My name is Eric Fraunholz, as you have already heard. I'm the executive director of the German-American Institute Saxony and of the American Space Leipzig, located right here in the East Wing of the University Library. As I stand before you in this beautiful venue, I'm reminded of the journey that brought us here and who paved the way to this very moment. While I often receive recognition as sort of the founder of the DAI Sachsen, the German-American Institute, it was really Crister Garrett who laid the foundation upon which I built, basically, right? I'm very grateful for that, and I'm grateful for the people, many of whom are in this room, who helped me and believed in the project. People like Professor Katja Kanzler, chair of the German-American Institute, Professor Ulrich Schneider, the former director of the University Library, who's unfortunately not here today, Crister's wife, Claudia Garrett, the US Consulate General, as well as my deputy director, Erica, Friedrich, and our team, and many, many more. So as we gather here tonight to honor Crister Garrett's life and legacy, let us remember the vision and dedication of a man who believed in the power of transatlantic dialogue and understanding. It all started a decade ago at Crister's kitchen table. where we discussed some mediocre papers I had written. Crister at that meeting introduced me to the American Space Initiative, and he asked me if I wanted to assist him in creating such a space in Leipzig. The American Space Leipzig was then inaugurated on December 3rd, 2013, and is really more than only a space at the university library. Yes, it is a library, but it's also an educational platform where students learn about opportunities for studying abroad in the United States. And most importantly, it's an initiative that organizes public events on transatlantic topics, engaging with the Saxon public in a meaningful dialogue. That has made American Space Leipzig a testing ground, a place where the intricacies of transatlantic dialogue in Eastern Germany are explored and understood. We came to understand that the dialogues we engage in here are shaped profoundly by the unique historical context of Eastern Germany, a region where, and as John already said, a region where perspectives on the United States may differ from regions in Western Germany. Crister soon realized the potential for something larger. He recognized the growing need and interest in transatlantic dialogue in Eastern Germany, and this is where the idea of the DRI Sachsen was born. So with the help of the US Consulate and the Saxon Staatskanzlei, Crister advocated for the importance and potential impact of such an initiative. Then, in February 2019, Crister let me know that he will soon have a meeting with all sorts of important people to talk about the concrete next steps. This meeting was scheduled on March 6, 2019. It was the very day we lost Crister Garrett. So I went to this meeting in his name, and fast forward 5 years, we are here tonight honoring the life and legacy of Crister Garrett. Dr. Stephen Sokol is really the perfect fit for our first Crister Garrett Memorial Lecture. As president of the American Council on Germany, he's a leading figure in transatlantic dialogue, and as we will learn in his lecture tonight, he has spent a substantial part of his career living and thinking about transatlantic dialogue in Eastern Germany. But Steve has also a strong personal connection to Crister. I had the privilege of meeting Steve Sokol this September in Berlin, and his name rang a bell, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. So when I returned home, I searched for his name in my emails, and indeed an email exchange between Crister and I from June 1st, 2018 popped up. Crister wrote, and I quote, "Hi, Eric. I hope you had a relatively restful few days off. Had breakfast this morning with Steve Sokol. He said he had a good exchange with the ambassador. Steve and I go back many years." And I responded, quote, "It's such a great feeling to watch all the dots connecting and see the results of our hard work. Steve Sokol sounds like a very interesting person. I hope that I can meet him sometime." Steve, nice to meet you. And thank you so much for joining us tonight all the way from New York City. It's not just an honor, but a meaningful continuation of a conversation that has been going on for many years now. We look forward to your insights and contributions to this ongoing dialogue, and thank you.
Well, herzlichen Dank. I really appreciate that. It's great to be back in Leipzig. It's a real delight to be here and to see all of you. John, it's great to see you. I'm glad we had some time together today, and thank you for your remarks. Kaisa, it's good to see you again, even though neither of us can quite put the finger on when we met before. Please give your mom and your sister my best regards, and they are missed today as well. Eric, herzlichen Dank. Erika, herzlichen Dank as well. I am delighted to be here. Meine Damen und Herren, it's great to see some familiar faces, but also to meet some new people. The spirit of Crister Garrett is very much on display tonight as I hear everything that's been said before, and as I look around the room. He was truly tireless in his passion and his enthusiasm to strengthen the German-American partnership and to build bridges. And I think that the Crister Garrett Scholarship Program is just such a wonderful initiative to really invest in that next generation of transatlanticists at this time, it's incredibly important to make that investment so that we have more people who are dedicated to supporting this relationship. I'd also like to thank the consulate and Fulbright Germany for supporting this evening, because both the consulate and Fulbright Germany have been key instigators and supporters of the relationship and in building ties. And that's just one of the many things, too, that Crister and I have in common as Fulbright alumni. I certainly know that my Fulbright changed my life, and I think Crister would say the same thing as well. You have a wonderful partner in John Crosby as the relatively new Consul General here in Leipzig. We spent a little less than an hour together today and hatched a number of plans for the city, for the region. So I hope you will engage with him and be creative in terms of how to not just fill an American space, but the relationship with life. When Eric invited me to speak to you this evening and to give the inaugural Crister Garrett lecture, I was truly humbled and totally surprised. I mean, I think that you'll agree that I was shocked and surprised. I asked Eric how long I should speak, and he said, as long as you want, but when we move next door for the reception, you'll know that you've gone on for too long. And so I'll try to be relatively brief, especially since I feel like we've reached the point where almost everything has been said, just not by everybody. And so I apologize if some of what I say is repetitive to what you've heard already. I was really touched when Eric asked me to speak, because it's not been often that I've been asked to reflect on the life and legacy of a friend and of somebody who I considered to be a very important Mitstreiter in really trying to do important work to deepen the mutual understanding between Germany and the United States. And he's certainly missed. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to gather today to both remember Crister, but also to remember and celebrate the founding of American Space Leipzig 10 years ago. Because as I said before, it's not just about having a space, it's about filling it with life, filling it with activity, filling it with engagement. And that's something that has certainly happened here, and certainly something that I think Crister would very much have appreciated. And it's wonderful that the DAI Sachsen grew out of that and became yet another pillar for the German-American partnership here in Leipzig. It's actually part of a network of 13 other institutes across Germany. And as you heard, it's the only such institute in the East. And I think that that makes it incredibly special because I think that the work in the East is incredibly important. Far too often we take the relationship for granted, and that's not something that we can do. And so having an institute here that's active in the East, I think is very important. And that's one of the things that Crister and I really developed a shared perspective on, a shared appreciation for. We were obviously committed to the Transatlantic Partnership. We were committed to educating and informing people on both sides of the Atlantic about the fact that this is an indispensable partnership. We had an appreciation and I sometimes think an understanding for language and the importance of language in terms of breaking down barriers and building that understanding. But we also had a deep appreciation for the Neue Bundesländer and for the developments here in that seminal period in the 1990s. And Kaisa, as you were speaking and talked about curiosity, I was reminded also about Crister's curiosity and how important that is when thinking about this relationship. For me, I mean, other than a couple of hours in East Berlin in 1986 when I visited Berlin, and then regular visits to East Berlin when I lived in West Berlin as a Fulbright scholar from 1988 to early 1990, I was unable to explore the rest of East Germany. It was virtually impossible for me as an American living in West Berlin to travel anywhere, maybe Potsdam, but that was about it. And I got to know Berlin pretty well when I was in Berlin from 88 to early 90. I made a point of going to Ostberlin once every 4 to 6 weeks because I was curious about what life was like behind the wall. But I only got a little bit of a snapshot. But when the wall came down, I knew that I was a Zeitzeuge. I knew that I had a front row to history. I knew that I was seeing something unfold that would really change the world that I had lived in. And at the time, I believed if I had a better degree, I could do interesting work. And so I went back to the United States and got a master's degree, and ended up coming back to Germany because I had no idea really what sort of an important role Germany would play in my professional life, or in my personal development. And I ended up coming back to Germany in 1993 and lived here for a decade. I had a series of interesting jobs. I was at the German Marshall Fund of the United States first, and then I was at a nonprofit consulting company based in Bonn, but where I was involved with Liegenschaftskonversion in Eastern Germany, the old NVA and Soviet Stützpunkte. And then I was at the Aspen Institute at the end. And in that decade that I spent in Germany, much of my focus was on developments in Eastern Germany and on what was going on in Eastern Germany. And it's quite possible that it was during that time that I actually met Crister because he was a Bosch Fellow in 1994, 1995, so early on in my tenure in Germany. But I didn't really get to know him until quite a bit later, when I went back to the States in 2002 and worked for the first time at the American Council on Germany. He was directing the European Studies program at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and served as the director of the American Council on Germany's chapter in Madison, Wisconsin. And it was clear from those, initial interactions with him at the time that we had a lot in common, that we'd been bitten by the international bug as young children. He spent his formative years in Beirut, that we had somehow along the way developed a deep interest in Germany and in really building the ties between these two countries. And what struck me also was just how thought-provoking, how thoughtful, and how kind he was, as a person. And his passion for Leipzig, right? He loved Leipzig. And I often wondered why he kept coming back, right? First as a Fulbright professor at the Institute for American Studies from 2003 to 2005, then as a DAAD International Guest Scholar at the Institute for American Studies. And in 2007, he became a professor in the American Studies department here at the university. And everybody who I've spoken with, who ever engaged with him or took classes with him, raves about what an amazing professor that he was. At the ACG, we were sorry to leave him. We were sorry to see him leave Madison, but we were delighted to have a new partner here in Leipzig, and he's somebody who we worked very closely with during the time that he was here. Hence the email that Eric was talking about. But for Crister, as you've now heard, it was also incredibly personal. His wife was here. He has raised 2 German-American daughters here. And so it's clear that that was part of the magnet that always brought him back. But I think it was also a fascination with the narrative of what's going on here in the East and where can one play a role. Both of us had an opportunity to spend time here after the euphoria of reunification died down. We had a chance to talk with people and work with people as they sort of rolled up their sleeves and made unification happen, that they tried to make the country into one. And it was really during this time that I had a chance to travel pretty extensively in Eastern Germany. I was able to meet people, I was able to make friends, develop an understanding for some of the trends and tendencies. And some of my dearest friends today come from that time, including David Gill, who is the German Consul General in New York and is actually a Sachse, right? He comes from close to Zittau. So you should all know that in New York, you have a standard bearer, ein Fahnenträger, for relations between Saxony and the United States. But for me as a young American in the 1990s, it was fascinating to visit this place that had been untouchable for me before that. At the German Marshall Fund, I ran a Reisestipendienprogramm für Fachleute aus den neuen Bundesländern. I managed a small sort of grant program that focused on economic development and brought together structurally weak regions in Eastern Germany with similar regions in the United States for exchanges. And then, as I mentioned, when I was in Bonn, I was focused on the redevelopment of former military sites from the NVA and from the Soviet time. And it gave me an opportunity not just to travel to the state capitals and other major cities, but also to get out of those cities and to meet with lots of different people. And as you might imagine from my Anglo-American first name and my Slavic last name, people didn't know what to expect. And the Aussies were heilfroh that I wasn't a Wessie, and the Wessies were very happy that I wasn't an Aussie. And so they would speak to me very openly. I learned a lot about what was going on in the mid-90s and what the Stimmung, what the mood in the country was. Fast forward to the work that we've been doing at the American Council on Germany, and I'd say we have tried very, very hard over the years to include representatives from Eastern Germany in our programs and in our activities. In recent years, we've conducted a number of exchange programs that have included representatives from Leipzig that have focused on issues like sustainable urban development, social cohesion, workforce development, and digitalization. And all of these issues are inherently local, but to have the opportunity to exchange thoughts with practitioners on these subjects across the Atlantic can be invaluable, can be incredibly useful as we try to develop solutions to common problems. The problems are not identical, but they are very similar. And it's through these people-to-people exchanges that we're able to really share perspectives and learn. And what was interesting was over the years that I was doing this work, both in Berlin at the German Marshall Fund, and then more recently, I would sometimes surprise some of my West German friends by saying that I felt that the average East German, der Ostdeutsche an sich, might have more in common with an American than der Westdeutsche an sich. And that would surprise people. They would say, how is that possible? We've always thought about West Germans and Americans being so close. And I think that the common perception was that there would be more in common because of history, because of the ties that we have. And I think it's also because prior to the Wende, the relationship was really driven by the relationship between Bonn and Washington, not between Berlin and Washington. It was a relationship between West Germany and the United States, not Germany and the United States. And I'm sure it also had something to do with the post-war legacy of GIs being in the West and the fact that West Germany was under the Allied sphere of influence while Ostdeutschland was under the Soviet sphere of influence. But let me tell you why I often felt that there was more in common between the East Germans and the Americans, and it centers around an intrinsic sense of independence, of adaptability, and perhaps most importantly, of resilience. These are attributes that I often saw when I worked with people from the East about how to address the issues around structural change, around Strukturwandel. And that is a topic that came up over and over and over again when I was in the East in the 1990s. But what's interesting is, as I was preparing for today's talk, this observation of resilience is also something that's backed up in quite a number of scientific studies. For example, there was a paper that was just published in 2022 on mental health and quality of life in both parts of Germany by the Front Public Health Organization. And they found that the highest level of resilience was reported by Eastern Germans rather than their Western counterparts. And this is as late as 2022, which really sort of surprised me. Related to that, and this won't come as a surprise to any of the people who are in this room right now, East German women in particular proved to be incredibly resilient in the social and economic turmoil that was brought about by German unification. In an article that was published just before the coronavirus pandemic, Anna Kaminsky, the executive director of the Federal Foundation for the Study of Communist Dictatorship in East Germany, said that after unification, women knew how to be financially independent, they knew how to be multitaskers, and they were able to adapt to the changed situation. Despite having been cut off from the West for many years, I do think that East Germans and Americans have this sort of go-to, we will adapt, we will make things work attitude that one doesn't necessarily see everywhere else. So I was asked by Eric to talk about 30 years of transatlantic dialogue in the East. And I guess it sort of makes sense because it was a little over 30 years ago that I was managing an exchange program that focused on East Germany, and those programs involved decision makers and opinion leaders from the Neue Bundesländer. It was an opportunity to give them a different model for a democratic free market society as they tried to build new structures here in the East. And in my work at the time, I always felt that there was a strong foundation for the relationship between the United States and Eastern Germany, because I think that German unification would not have occurred without the strong support of the United States. And just to give two, perhaps banal examples, but I think important ones, we only have to think about two American presidents. In 1987, Ronald Reagan called on Gorbachev to tear down the wall. And in 1989, George Bush Sr. said that he did not have concerns about a reunited Germany as opposed to some of his counterparts in Paris and London, for example, who were incredibly concerned about what a united Germany might look like. And Bush and James Baker, as Secretary of State, did a tremendous amount to push through the 2+4 negotiations. And I think that it's fair to say that with the fall of the wall in 1989 and the dissolution of the Eastern Bloc, there was a real reevaluation of the ties, and there was a new era in German-American relations. And I think that the people living in the East really benefited from that. Soon after the Wende, the America House in West Berlin increased its outreach to the federal states. The German Marshall Fund, where I was privileged to work at that time, was the first US foundation that actually opened an office in East Berlin. I remember it vividly. I wasn't there for the office opening, but I worked in the Clara-Zetkin-Straße, which is now the Dorotheenstraße, and it's where the Bundestag offices are. And it began to develop a number of programs that involved people from the East. It soon after that closed its office in Bonn and focused all of its activities on its Berlin office. And according to one source that I found, by 1992, there was over 1.6 million euros being invested in programs focused on political development, economic development, dialogue, media policy, environmental protection, and teacher training, focused solely on Eastern Germany and the United States. There was an incredible uptick in people-to-people exchanges. And in short order, more than a dozen sister city partnerships between communities in the East and the United States were formed, including the one that we've heard a little bit about tonight between Houston and Leipzig. And I think it's interesting to note that that relationship is bearing dividends. That's an incredibly important tool for increased exchanges. With the fall of the wall, the cities in Eastern Germany were suddenly in the heart of Europe. And I think that that's one of the great Standortvorteile that this region of Middle Germany or Eastern Germany, the new Bundesländer, has. And I know that this is somewhat controversial, but when Chancellor Helmut Kohl talked about the promise of blühende Landschaften in the East, that did not depict the reality. The reality was actually one of the collapse of the East German economy. It was one where investment was sluggish at best. And it's really, I think, taken a while for this region to realize its full potential. But significant investments have been made, are in the planning stages, and a number of those investors are American companies. Along the same vein, it was interesting that more recently, now the Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, said that Eastern Germany is, quote, one of the most attractive economic regions of Europe, and internationally, word is getting out. So at least he's aware that there is a Standortvorteil here. Eastern Germany has become an important manufacturing hub for electric vehicles. I think Tesla's Gigafactory in Grünheide is a very good example of that. The war in Ukraine has led to decisions to reduce dependence on Russian oil and gas and increase Germany's energy independence. And there are also tremendous opportunities for that. The region has an abundant supply of renewable energy. One example is that Brandenburg produces more electricity from wind, solar, and biomass per head of population than any other state in Germany. And I think that these are opportunities for great collaboration. In these technical fields, whether one's talking about semiconductors or optics or e-mobility or renewables, the region also has thought leaders from the scientific community, and Saxony boasts the highest concentration of technical universities and research institutes. As John Crosby said, 30 years is a long time, right? But we've come a long way in many senses in terms of what underscores the foundation of the ties between Eastern Germany and the United States. There are obviously challenges specific to East Germany's or to the unification process, which has affected Eastern Germany. For example, the wage and wealth discrepancies still persist. East German representation in top positions in government and in the private sector is not nearly where it should be. Many would have thought, would have hoped that these disparities between East and West would have been eliminated by now. But what I keep coming back to is that at the local level, many of the challenges that are faced in Germany and in the United States, and in particular in Eastern Germany, are very similar. These range from the high-level foreign policy and national security concerns and challenges that we have to local issues like sustainable urban development or structural change or workforce preparedness. And at the local level, it's where I see cities like Leipzig and the eastern states that have a lot to offer because they have experience dealing with transformation, dealing with Strukturwandel, dealing with that structural change. And I think as we consider the German-American partnership, it's important to continue the relationship, not just for historical reasons, not just for sentimental reasons, but because we need to work together to address some of these challenges. And this continues to be a period of important structural change. We're in an inflection point right now. We face an array of internal and external challenges in both of our societies, and against the backdrop of the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, we're seeing waning trust in democratic institutions and practices. Much as many of you in this room are watching the US election in a year, I can tell you that a lot of people in the United States are watching the 3 state elections in Brandenburg, Thüringen, and Sachsen next year and are very curious about what will happen here politically. Democratic processes on both sides of the Atlantic are being challenged, and we need to come to terms with the fact that we are living in a new global environment. Crister always understood that the intensive exchange of ideas across borders and across boundaries was crucial because it enables us to learn from each other. And if nothing else, Crister was a wonderful teacher, and it was about that learning process that was so important to him. But when you apply that to the practice, it becomes even more clear how important it is to work together to try to develop solutions jointly to common challenges. And I see concrete examples of that in the work that we do at the ACG. Having forums where you can bring people together, like the American Space, like the DAI Sachsen, is incredibly important. And I come back to that common attribute, that common characteristic that I sort of found in the mid-1990s between Germans, East Germans and Americans, namely resilience. And I think that's something that we need more than ever, given how challenging these times are. It's been wonderful to share a couple of thoughts with you about the state of the relationship, to remember Crister this evening. My only regret is that he was not here as well. I think he also would have probably delivered a much more thoughtful speech than I have. He's certainly missed. But let me just finish, with one more plug for Leipzig, and that is that we had a series of study groups visit Leipzig over the course of this year. I think it was 4 groups in total that we brought to Leipzig. And the group that we brought in June said durch die Bank weg that they preferred Leipzig to Berlin, and they all said that they would be back. So I think that Leipzig is an attractive place. It is a place where the German-American relationship can thrive, and certainly with partners like the American Space Leipzig, like DAI Sachsen, and the Consul General, John Crosby, you've got great partners to make that happen. So with that, thank you very much for being here this evening, and I look forward to talking with you during the reception.
Thank you again to everybody, to all of our speakers, for everybody else for being here for our first annual memorial lecture. So we hope to see you all here again next year. And we hope you'll join us for a reception out now in the room across the hall. So thank you.